Hey there friends, Dave Paulides, CanAm Missing Project, copyrighted edition for our video channel. And I thank you for being here. This is a missing persons episode. I had some comments recently, pretty negative comments, that, hey Dave, I'm on a missing persons channel, what are you talking about mental health for? Well, let me start. And for the people that have been here for a while, this may seem like old hat to you, but to some of the people that are new, mental health is a big deal to me. I had a son named Ben who had some mental health challenges in life that pushed him to the brink of taking his life. And the hundreds, if not thousands of emails and notes I've had from people in the village who have had similar issues with their kids and relatives. Mental health, if you haven't experienced a challenging event in that area in your life, it's a big deal. And there's more and more people that are being challenged by it daily. As our world gets more stressful, as it gets more difficult to feed yourself, I was just listening to a radio broadcast today where they were reporting a food service for the poor in Kentucky had a line a mile long for people wanting to get food. Friends, that's an emergency. And I'm concerned. Now it's obvious that our government is going to feed these people. In New York, just recently, the mayor was complaining that he wasn't getting any assistance from the federal government to feed and house the immigrants that are coming across our southern border and going to New York. And he's wondering how he's supposed to take care of them in the long run. Well, why wouldn't the federal government step up if they're the ones letting them in? Now, I won't go into that here. But mental health, it's huge. It's a huge issue no matter where you are in America. And we don't have the resources to take care of the emergency in our area, no matter where you are at. It's something that has been ignored in the US for decades. And law enforcement, people get mad at them for the way they deal with mental health. In the majority of counties in the United States, there isn't a comprehensive way to deal with mental health issues. Now, in Santa Clara County, where I was a policeman, we had Valley Medical Center, which was a county facility that had a mental health department. And anyone you were putting on a hold went to that facility. And a lot of big counties had the resources to have these type of mental health facilities. You brought somebody in, they evaluated them, decided if they were a threat to themselves or others. If they said they weren't, they were out the door within hours. If they said, yeah, I think I'm going to hurt myself, then they would hold them there. Now what about the counties that don't have the facilities? Now, I have friends in LA County. If you haven't been there, don't go. But watch news broadcasts from there. Look at news broadcasts from Philadelphia. Look at their streets. The number of homeless, the number of addicts, the number of mental health issues are off the charts. What can we do? Well, as a family, you've got to hold the ones that you love close. And you've got to protect them from the evil that's out there in the mental health world, namely addiction. You have to educate them that just one mistake, smoking, say, one cigarette, one joint that's laced with fentanyl, you're dead. And don't tell me it doesn't happen. It happens. You can't make that mistake. You can't even do it once. I don't care what the peer pressure is. You can't do drugs out there. That doesn't mean that I'm saying, hey, you can't go to a marijuana building in downtown Denver that's, has government authority and approval to operate and buy your weed. Of course, I'm not advocating it at all, but at least you know that it's coming from a reliable source and it's not going to have fentanyl on it. But I wouldn't buy any weed on the street. I'm very concerned about mental health. I'm ultra concerned about mental health because there's very little money on the whole that the federal government is allocating for this. Move on. Hey Dave, regarding the note you read from the dad that pulled his daughter from school and pursued her flying interest, bravo to that dad. One of the best things I did for myself in my teenage years was to remove myself from high school. I wasn't bullied or depressed or anything like that. I just couldn't stand the environment. The drama, the garbage curriculum just seemed to be a huge waste of time, and I wanted something different. My parents probably wouldn't have initiated the move on their own, so I did it, and they were really left with no choice. Parents were taught to believe that the state-approved path to success is the only way. For some it is, but there are alternatives. The weight that was lifted from me was significant and provided hope and excitement for the future. It's not a solution to everyone, but in my case, it was exactly what I needed. I immediately got my GED, went to work for a year, and then enrolled in college for computer programming because it was of interest to me and I loved it. I excelled in the field, and 40 years later, I'm still in that field. Parents need to take back the reins from the state when it comes to their children. Stay involved. Don't be afraid to go a different way. Sometimes it's best to remove yourself or your children from a bad situation. Amen. Story. I had a really good friend in San Jose. He was a lot like me, except he didn't go to college. I think his dad was a garbage man. This guy went to high school near where I went to. Got out of school, and his neighbor was a plumber. And he says, hey, I need some help. You come work with me, and I'll work your way up, and you'll be an experienced apprentice plumber in just a matter of time. So this guy was 18, went to work for this guy, was making really good money at the time, just as a helper. And this guy that he was working for had a truck, and he would travel anywhere in San Jose to fix a plumbing issue. And he had a big phone number on the side of his van, and I forgot the name of the company, but it was a real easy name, like Plumbing Help, something like that. And then a big phone number underneath. And he was busy all the time. He said he could be busy 20 hours a day. So this friend of mine worked for this guy for 2 years, and this guy says, hey, if you continue to work for me, I'm going to buy you your own van. You can take it home. I'll outfit it with all the tools. I'll pay you this amount of money as an apprentice, journeyman, plumber, and you'll work your way up. He goes, wow, all right. What happened is that this guy ended up working for this person for a number of years. And when I left San Jose, I think he was making $100,000 a year with no expense. He was just a salaried plumber. And if he needed to pick up more money, he would work weekends for this guy. And then if he even needed to make really good money, like triple what he was making per hour, he would work from 12 at night to 8 in the morning on an emergency basis. And he said, Dave, I know a lot of people won't say that this is extravagant or this is real beautiful work. But he goes, Dave, I'll always have a job. And he says, there's going to be a time where I'm going to break away from my friend that I've worked for a number of years and start my own company and do exactly what he did. And the guy, he was the second van that this guy ever bought. Now that guy has 10 vans going all over San Jose. And he's making money off of all of them. I'm sure the guy's way over a millionaire by now, the guy owning the plumbing company. The point being, if you find a niche, fill it. Find a need and a niche, fill it. This guy has the experience, he could do it. And you know what, my friend? He never had any educational expense. He never had any debt. He was one of the first people I knew in our group to buy a home. So, you're a young person out there. Got to go to college? No, you don't have to go to college. No. In fact, I would say right now, I probably would not send my kids to 90% of the colleges out there because I wouldn't be sure what I would get back. Now, Ben was different. Ben had a mind all of his own. I was never afraid of what class I'd put Ben in because he was smart enough to look right through the professor. And there were a couple of times he told me, "Oh, Dad, this guy's just whacked." But he was smart enough to play the game in class and write the papers that he needed to get an A. And then at the end he'd go, "Dad, look what I wrote." And he goes, "It's all garbage." But I just played the game. That's what the guy wanted to see. And I did it. Brilliant. You don't need to go to college to be a success. You don't. Next letter. Hey Dave, I'm from Scotland. I recently filmed a stationary flashing UFO like what you show in your recent upload. It took place on the 28th of July this year at 6:20 while I was out walking my dog. I've had a few sightings in the last couple of years, but my first sighting was between 98 and 2003. Can't remember the exact date as I was younger and didn't care. But over the last couple of years, I've had more sightings than I have ever had. I've seen mostly orb, sphere-shaped objects that fade in and out, a light that had enhancing the footage looks like a triangle and 3 objects, to recently one I'm writing to you about. Apparently Venus was setting that night according to my star app, but I seriously doubt it was Venus. There was no aircraft according to my flight radar either. It was too low and close to be Venus in my opinion. Please let me know your thoughts. I don't think it was Venus. Next one. Hey Dave, I've had a couple of experiences with very odd things involved in the subject of shoes. It seems to be a recurring item in these missing cases. One 35 years ago, one a couple of years ago. Both happened at the same time of the year on the coldest part of the year. Well, at least cold for here. Then there's a kicker from my father who had a similar experience in the same area at the same time of the year. Hold your taters there for a second. The first was out in what we call East Glades. It's a large wafer of land that takes up the furthest southeast corner of the Florida peninsula. My friend and I were about 6 miles into the glade on the furthest east fields, with only one square to the south where the potato fields end and sawgrass, willow swamp began. The easterly side is a cooling canals for the Turkey Point nuclear power plant. You can look that up and find out where it is. We're fishing very narrow irrigation ditches that border all these fields. They were set up in large 1.5 mile squares with very long straight roads connecting them. We'd park at the intersection and my friend would head north fishing the east side, the return heading south fishing the west side. I'd do the same on my side. Now to the meat of this. I was about 2/3 done with one side of the road and I'd released several bass that took my rubber frog when I see a figure walking on the road south of me from out of the willow swamp. They were on the last block and over a 1/4 mile away when I noticed them. This was very odd because it was quite cold for South Florida, low 50s, and late in the afternoon with a little over an hour of good daylight left. Whoever it was moving painfully slow, and when I put my glass on them, could tell it was a woman in a long pink nightshirt with a teddy bear on it, taking what appeared to be baby steps, and she didn't have shoes on. Okay, that's pretty weird. Weirdness factor just went up several notches and fixing to peg the meter by sunset. But hey, this is South Florida. I kind of figured she was a working girl that got left out there. So I made my way down to the intersection closest to her and waited. Even if she was a working girl, nobody should be left that far out in the glade, especially when it was going to get in the low 40s that night. It took about 30 minutes to make it to me. The first thing she said, "Do you have a cigarette?" I said, "No." Then I asked her, "What are you doing out here?" To which she responded, and I kid you not, this is verbatim. "Swinning with alligators." Not swimming. This just reinforced my deduction of her that I told her that my buddy and I could give her a ride back to town and drop her off at the first convenience store, and I'd give her money so she could call somebody. She just responded with a nod and walked about 25 yards to the east of the intersection. She then squatted down, pulling the shirt over her knees, and waited. Just then my buddy pulled the car down and asked me who the crazy son of a son was. I told him we couldn't leave her out here, so let's just take her back to town and call it a day. He then said she wasn't scared of that hog leg you're carrying, and what if someone we know of and the police sees us dropping her off? Well, after a little convincing, he agreed that we told her to get in and we're leaving, and she did just that with a nod. The sun is setting just as we get about a quarter mile from the paved road, and Baby Steps blurts out, "We have to go back. I left my shoes." I tell her there is no way we are going back for your shoes. We are taking you to the store, and whoever picks you up can take you them. She was very adamant about wanting to retrieve her shoes. So much so, she says we must stop then and let her out. She says, "I cannot go back without my shoes." I stop and tell her we aren't going back, but before I can finish the sentence, she just gets out. At that moment, my buddy looks at me and says, "She's a spook." I can tell him he's nuts. She's just a lost streetwalker. He then reaches back and puts his hand on the seat, and she has been sitting on for nearly half an hour, and it's stone cold, and added she had no smell. And he was right on both counts. So I'll check the mirrors. There's nothing. So I then get out of the car and look down the road. Nothing was behind us in the huge potato fields on either side of the gravel road. She was just gone, vanished. Now fast forward, that's pretty weird. Now fast forward a few years. I'm talking with my dad, who moved here with his family in 1922 when he was just 12 years old. We were discussing the East Glade and how much it had changed, but how similar for he and I. So I asked him if he had ever seen anything really odd out there and told him about Baby Steps. Without skipping a beat, he said, "Oh, so you've seen her too." He then told me and one of his buddies were approached by a woman out there that walked up to them in the winter evening in the mid-30s. This would have made him very near the same age I was when he saw her. She too asked him for a cigarette. The only difference was she had on high heel shoes, nothing else. But nothing else. Now fast forward a couple years ago on a cold night. I was on my way home from work at 11 p.m. and riding the farm fields out by my water plant on the edge of the Everglades. I'm riding the farm fields and groves with the bar light on, looking for coyotes to cull. On a stretch of crushed limestone gravel road with a grove on one side surrounded by 6-foot fence and a 40-plus acre freshly plowed field on the other, I see the silhouette of a person on the road in front of me. As I got closer, I see it's two people walking single file. It's not to be a jerk. I turned the bar lights off when I got close to them. When I get in range for the headlights to make them out better, I realize it's a woman in her mid-length black dress following a very tall, very thin man. When I'll say talk, I'll mean he was tall as the roof of my lifted Tahoe with 33-inch tires, and he seemed very upset. He was flailing his arms, and I assumed by way his head was nodding up and down. He seemed to be berating her. At about 50 feet, I see she's carrying her black high-heel shoes in her right hand on a gravel road. A road just like the Baby Steps was on, but it didn't register in my head just yet. When the tall fellow was right next to my open window, less than 10 feet away, I could see the thin man's mouth moving as his head nodding and arms flailing. Problem was, there was no sound coming from him. All I hear through the open window is the popping of the gravel under the tires and low rumble of the exhaust. Now, up to this point, I again just figured South Florida, man and woman. Then it hit me. I remembered baby steps. The woman was walking just like baby steps. She had the same mousy brown hair, same height, same build. Was it baby steps? So at no more than 4 truck lengths, I hit the equally bright rear and look in the mirrors. Nothing. I hit the big light and spin the truck around. Again, nothing was there. I, my friend, and my father are not the only people who have seen baby steps. Through the years and talking to other people, I found out she is fairly well known by folks who have been there for a long time. No one really knows a backstory on her, but I would figure whatever it is, it's why she still wanders the glades concerned about her shoes. Now, after listening to you for a while, I'm wondering if baby steps has any relationship to the missing shoes and the missing people you have brought to light, or is it something deeper? Could she be another of people that could fit your criteria of vanishing? Just her story is lost in time, and she is caught between the two here and where she is. I can't be certain of what, why, or how. What I do know is she exists. When she is seen, she is as real as taxes. But then in the time it takes to look in the mirror, she's gone. So if I drove that area regularly, I put a little driving cam under my rear view mirror looking forward so I could film what was going on in front of me. See if baby steps showed up on film. And if she didn't, you're looking through your front glass and you see these people, but then you look in your cam, you don't see anybody? Keep driving. Weird story. You know, I've heard similar things. When Harvey and I were in Oklahoma, there was an area near a cemetery. And when people drove through the cemetery, oftentimes they'd see a Native American from dressed like in the 1800s walking the road. With much reverence. He would nod his head as you went by. Same thing, people would drive around and look for him again and he'd be gone. I remember that story. It's pretty weird. Next one. Hey Dave, this story happened in 2022. I was sitting in my car in a parking lot of a local mall. I saw to my left what looked like a white plastic bag being picked up by the wind and flying around. That's not unusual because we frequently have windy conditions in this area. But the bag became a round white object moving intelligently in front of me. It was flying in circles and bobbing up and down, maybe about 50 to 100 feet off the ground. It was joined by approximately 4 to 5 others. I noticed that it would catch the sun, it would be in a flash as if something metallic on it. I watched it join the others and then they would separate and some would disappear. They were white ball-shaped objects. They continued to dart around and then flew in a circle while gaining altitude and then disappeared. There was one main one and they always seemed to stand out at the most. I did get some footage of what I saw. I have a video that shows flashes of light and these objects darting around. If you have the capacity to enlarge and slow down the video, you can see them, but I'm unable to send the video because it says the file is too large. I've heard similar stories 1,000 times. Yeah. Next one. Oh, by the way, you notice there was no location on that? I really don't like people who send things describing an event and don't give a location. Now, I read that for educational purposes. Anytime I read something from now on and there's not a location where it happened, it's going to get tossed. So put a location in. Hey Dave, I was 18 years old. Myself and a friend were spending the night catfish fishing. The location is Table Rick Lake, mouth of the Roaring River arm outside the town of Eagle Rock. That's Florida. At some point in the late evening, my friend and I had fallen asleep. We were awakened by a bright light reflecting off the water. Approximately half a mile to our east, we could see a craft a few hundred feet floating slowly above the lake. At first, we thought it was a helicopter, but there was no sound. As the craft moved slowly to the west towards our location, we continued to see the craft more clearly. It was approximately 100 feet in an oval shape. It had a fairly flat dome shape to its top and bottom. The craft flew directly over our heads. There were lights on the vertical edges of the craft and vertical beams of light protruding from the bottom. All lights were white with random degrees of brightness. The craft appeared to be following the layout of the lake. After passing by, the craft slowly and silently began to rise back into the sky. At approximately 500 feet, the lights went out and the craft simply disappeared. My friend and I sat silently for a moment. We never said a word to each other during this entire event. It was almost like a dream. Afterwards, we just couldn't believe what we had seen. We did not tell anyone for fear of being ridiculed or accused of being drunk. We had not been drinking. What added validity to this experience for me was a few months later. During a break, I was looking through UFO magazine in the grocery store where I worked. I noticed a story about a group of UFO sightings across southern Missouri a few months earlier. Thus was during the exact time frame of my experience. The sightings began at the Bull Shoals Lake area and spread west into eastern Oklahoma over the Grand Lake area. The trajectory would have taken the craft over 4 large lakes. A point of possible interest in these lakes were created using hydroelectric dams. Feel free to use this story as you wish. Look forward to meeting you in Florida at the Mid-Florida Bigfoot Conference. I will be there in April. That's in Ocala, Florida. So, the person talked about seeing a UFO. In Missing 411, the UFO Connection, I interviewed some men who saw a triangular-shaped UFO, just like in this poster. And they were somewhat afraid to say a lot about it at the beginning. But there were 3 of them that saw it, and all of them validated each other's sightings. It freaked them out. Freaked them out so bad that they were in the middle of nowhere, and one of the guys had to drive out that night. He goes, I couldn't stay there, Dave. There's no way. I'm not staying. I'm leaving. So I get it. Watch the movie and you will understand a lot more about this UFO issue and missing people. Next letter. Hey Dave, my first encounter was in the mid-70s. I was in Santa Cruz, California at the Kumwa Jazz Festival with my friend Thomas from South America. Let me stop there. So, in 1989, there's a big earthquake in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was living in Santa Cruz at the time. And earthquake was a big one. I lived just below the University of California, Santa Cruz. And beautiful spot. Beautiful. I really enjoyed Santa Cruz. They had the university setting. It was kind of a hippie place, kind of. And university, so there was a lot of smart people. And I was over the mountain from San Jose, so I kind of got away from everybody. And it was just nice. I liked it. Always liked living there. So why am I telling the story? Well, one day we're staying at a place in Capitola, which was right next to Santa Cruz. I'm on the back deck, and we kind of sit on this hillside, and we could see for a lot the bay of the Pacific Ocean. And we were with some people. I say, hey, come here. And coming from the east are 3 helicopters. 1, 2, 3, and one's on one side, one's on the other, and one's behind, and in the middle is some kind of craft. And I say some kind because I couldn't make it out, and neither could anybody else. And there's 4. There's the craft in the middle, one on each side, one in the back, and it's flying right above treetops. And they're moving pretty fast. Everybody runs over. And this thing flies right over the top of us. And the weird thing was, it looked all blurry around this craft that's flying over. You couldn't make out what it was. Obviously, they're escorting something right on the edge of the ocean. We were right on the edge of the Pacific Ocean, and it went north. And because it was right at tree line, you lost sight of it very quickly. Yeah, I'll never forget that. Anyhow. We were outside during the show intermission, and Thomas said, look up, as he pointed to a spot in the sky. I saw what looked like a jetliner cruising at an altitude of maybe 40,000 feet or so. It was going at a normal jet speed in a linear direction when it suddenly took off at what I can only describe as hyperspeed in an almost sideways direction, causing the light to phase out like the ships did in Star Trek. As the light from the craft zipped off at the unfathomable speed, my friend said, "That's it. That was a UFO." He said, "Yeah, it was." Coming from Chile, it was common to see them. Personally, my worldview opened much wider after that sighting and caused me to question everything. Stunning. My second encounter was a few years later at the Gilliland Ranch when I was visiting there with a friend from Boeing. Gilliland Ranch is near Mount Adams in Washington. I counted about 30 unidentified lights doing various things, some of which may not be satellites. But this one craft that popped in from the western sky and dazzled was a very pearlescent orange light globe, which I examined out loud was elegant and gorgeous. James Gilliland, who owns the ranch and is very woo-woo, said the ship said it was Vishnu. I don't know who or what it was aside from stately and awesome. As for all we know, it was Vishnu, but it was splendid. It rolled across the sky to the east and blinked out of view. The third sighting was a craft in the early evening one summer about 10 years ago. It was a lovely, solid light that appeared to be pulling a similar light behind it, smaller light behind it. I happened to mention this to someone who was talking about UFOs, and she said, "Oh, I've seen that one. I call it the wagon." That would be a good way to describe the sight, as a larger body pulling a little round wagon behind it. It too could have been a weather balloon, but the two were drifting along at clear sight for everyone. It happened to look up, and frankly, I'm not privy to the sighting of weather balloons, so I may have seen one in the afternoon at the Everett Boeing plant a couple years back. That is sadly all I have for you. Hope to see you again soon, though I do have concern for the nice government when men will play nasty games with us about who and what UFOs are and shove at us a few of their back-engineered black ops crafts to cause fear or more. Thanks for what you do, sir. Yeah, I think they're already doing that. Hey Dave, I've had some experiences with an orb and 2 UFO sightings. The first was a white orb that I witnessed after hearing what seemed like someone walking through the small green belt in my backyard. To when a person would have appeared coming out of the green-white orb, the size of a softball, appeared and floated, yet glided and moved with purpose away from my position. It moved with purpose from the green belt towards my neighbor's home, no fences that surrounded the pool of my neighbor, and away from where I was standing. It appeared between the 2 neighboring homes after completing its path around the fence. Again, no location. Last time I'm doing this, folks. Second, my daughter and I were leaving in the evening around 8 p.m. for a run to the Walmart. A bright light in the sky appeared in front of us in the sky. At first, we thought it was a helicopter with a spotlight. However, after rolling down the windows, there's no sound. The bright light was not accompanied by a flashing green. The bright light was not accompanied by flashing green, blue, or red that would have made it feel normal if it were a helicopter. It followed us as we drove down Green Mountain towards Walmart. It then appeared from the sky as we approached the intersection of the Green Mountain and Carlisle. We drove in amazement as we felt like we were the only ones who could see it. How were others out driving not seeing what we were seeing? Last, as I was driving home with my daughter from Lebanon, Illinois, there's a location, approximately 11 p.m. towards our home in Belleville, a green ball followed by a streak of green seemed to fall across the sky to the right of us while driving down Belleville Street towards 50. The strange thing, driving home on Monday night, February 13, 2023, after leaving McKendree University, a helicopter was circling as I was driving down Belleville Street towards 50. The helicopter followed me from this position to my home in Belleville. Yeah, your car might have matched the description of one that was wanted, and they were seeing if it fit it, or they were waiting. Maybe it was a law enforcement helicopter. My husband is a retired Air Force officer who lived 11 miles from Scott Air Force Base in Illinois. I'm emailing you because you requested to hear back from anyone who witnessed UFOs, and I do not know if these would be any assistance, but I want to help to connect the dots. Thank you sincerely for all your work you are doing to keep the people aware and ready to act. Finally, my deepest condolences to you and your family on the loss of your precious son. Thank you for those letters. They were fascinating. And I still want to hear more about orbs. You know, there have been some reports of orbs causing cancers, disease, etc. I've talked about this before. And if it's true, that's really monumental, folks. So keep that in mind. So we got 3 missing person stories, and they're all from Wyoming. Now, why is that important? Have you watched this movie? Good part of the movie deals with Wyoming. And if you've watched the movie, you're going to get this segment. First story deals with a young boy, 2 years old, between 2 and 2.5 years old, named Nicholas Dailey. He went missing July 3rd, 1982. He and his family lived in Casper, Wyoming, and they took a drive 12 miles south to a place called the Lodgepole Campground on the Muddy Mountain, south of Casper. Elevation was about 7,000 feet. So this right here is Casper, string of mountains, and Muddy Mountain is just south of Casper. That's about 12 miles on this map, but very high mountain range, lots of greenery. This brown is plains. This brown right here is plains. This is a mountain range. This is where he disappeared. So on July 3rd, family's up there picnicking. Nicholas is with some other kids from another family, and they're all having fun. And they're camped right on the perimeter of the campground. Well, they lose sight of Nicholas for a couple minutes, and they go over to other kids. They say, "Hey, where'd Nicholas go?" And they go, "Oh, we don't know. He just disappeared." So they get all the families together. And there's like 10 of them. And they're all calling Nicholas's name, combing the campground. And you do this for 2 hours. And then they said, "We need to call the sheriff." So they call the sheriff, and they call the U.S. Forest Service. Well, the Natrona County Sheriff responded and became the lead investigative agency. And they immediately rallied up 200 search and rescue volunteers that showed up the next day. They brought in canines, experienced canines, put them at the point Nicholas was last seen, spent 2 days with canines crisscrossing the area, came up with nothing. Well, at that point, I'd be really nervous. Really, really nervous. Because a young boy 2 years old, a day, 2 days out in the wilderness, cold nights, I'd be worried. Plus, they're in an area that has bear, mountain lions. I'd be worried. Well, 56 hours after the disappearance, that's a long time for a 2-year-old to be gone. A very unusual event happened. A man named Bruce Luck, was his last name, Luck. And that's what this was, Luck. He was a motorcycle repairman from Casper. Well, the news in Casper, this was front page, top of the news every hour. And he heard about Nicholas being gone. So he took a day off from his repair job as a motorcycle man. He responded to the area. And as he pulled up on the perimeter of the campground, he got out, sat down on a boulder, put his head down, and prayed. Not a bad idea. And he asked God to help him find this little boy. Bruce got up, walked a straight line for 300 yards and walked right into Nicholas, laying in some tall grass. He couldn't believe it. Boy was alive. He couldn't believe his eyes. Picked up Nicholas, took him 150 feet to where other searchers were, handed him over, gave him to the parents. Physicians said that Nicholas was in impeccable condition. The Natrona County Sheriff said that the area that Bruce found Nicholas had been searched 2 times by canines, different times by different dogs, and had been walked through and covered by ground pounders at least 3 or 4 times. Couple of questions. Nicholas was gone for 56 hours, day and a half. Almost a day and a half. Where was he? Why wouldn't he have responded to his mom and dad and friends calling for him? What did he eat or what did he drink? Now, somebody that young can go a much longer period of time without eating, but he's pushing the outer limits of not drinking and surviving. How could he be in such good condition? How did the canines miss him? How did multiple canines miss him? I don't believe dogs miss people like this. I've had too much experience with it. I don't believe dogs miss people. I don't believe that many people would miss him. I don't believe he wouldn't respond to searchers, especially if he was hungry, if he was there. But have you watched Missing 411, the UFO Connection? Do you think Nicholas was there the whole time? Remember the hunter that disappeared and was placed back? I don't know. But Bruce's ask for help in finding him. Do you think his message was answered? The next story. Bob's a boy named Dillon McKinnon. Well, before we get into that, talk about Nicholas Dailey again in the Casper area. This is important. This is a map. So this is the Colorado border. This is Cheyenne, Wyoming. Remember in the movie we talked about the Air Force base at Cheyenne named Warren? It had the UFOs flying over it, documented by the Air Force. This is the Medicine Bow National Forest. Remember we talked about all of the missing hunters in that area? And the abductions and the UFOs seen in this area? Then you go just north and you have the Nicholas Dailey case. Is it all just a coincidence? Nothing here? Okay. I'm sorry. Let's move on. Next case. Dillon McKinnon. He was deer hunting. No age given on Dillon. But he went missing October 17th, 1932. I'm sorry, he was 17 years old. He was on the western slope of the Bighorn Mountains outside of Sheridan, Wyoming. He was a resident of Grable, Wyoming. He was hunting one of the most rugged areas of Wyoming. He left early in the morning of October 17th. He told his family exactly where he was going, and he was due home that night. Well, he didn't return. And surprisingly, nobody really raised the alarm on this case because he was so comfortable in the outdoors and he knew his way around a firearm, camping, survival. Nobody really raised the alarm that day. Even though mid-afternoon on October 17th, a huge storm came in and was dumping several feet of snow. When he left, it was good weather out, wasn't that cold. But that night, it got down to 10 degrees. Yeah, 22 degrees below 32 degrees freezing. It was very cold. And people had reported that he wasn't dressed that warmly. Well, early the next morning, his family reported him missing. But still, nobody really feared for his safety. But they wanted somebody to start looking. Again, a super experienced hunter. Knew the area he was going very well, wouldn't get lost. And the U.S. Forest Service ran the search. It was a 10-day search and rescue by locals, family, Forest Service, and the sheriff. They found nothing. They found nothing. And where is this? This is Sheridan, Wyoming. This is an area near Mail Creek, M-A-I-L, where Dillon was hunting. And this is Grable, where he lived. So just short drive up into the mountains, and he was hunting. I should tell you that this area is littered with bodies. People who haven't been found under very strange circumstances. So a 10-day search for 1932, that's a pretty major search. They found nothing, and they gave up. Well, he disappeared on October 17th. On October 28th, just a day after the search stopped, another hunting party, not even related to the search, was hunting in the area near Mail Creek, and they found Dillon's body. Pretty strange. I'll say real strange. Dillon was supposedly found laying on a bed of pine needles. They said it had looked as though he pushed the pine needles into a pile to lay on them. And it appeared that he went to sleep and didn't wake up. And the very peculiar part of the story is that laying next to the body are his two boots with the socks tucked inside the boots. The presumption was it was 10 degrees and he went to sleep and never woke up. And he was still in that primary hunting zone that he was in. So people said that he either didn't make an attempt to leave or he died the first night. I'm sorry, folks, but I don't believe that. If Dillon was alive, and he was alive the first night, then he would have kept moving because he knew that stopping would have killed him. He was an experienced outdoorsman. So I don't believe the scenario. The story about missing clothing, missing shoes, typical in my cases. Some people may say, well, maybe it's this or that, why he took his shoes off. I've had people take their clothing off and their shoes off within 200 yards of when they were last seen in 80-degree weather. So the shoe and the clothing issue, there's something more to it that has to do with these cases. Now, in the same area where Dillon disappeared, we got a case from 1923. Man's name is Richard Standen. He was 75 years old. Went missing October 9th, 1923. about 4 p.m. in the afternoon. Now, Richard used to live right outside of Sheridan, Wyoming. And in fact, he owned a ranch. And he ended up selling the ranch in 1913, and he moved to California. But he still had family in Sheridan. So in October of 1923, he and his wife came out to Sheridan to visit their daughter and her husband. Richard had been a lifelong hunter, outdoorsman. He knew the area out there like you know your city. Well, on October 9th, he told his family, hey, it's one of the last days of hunting season, so I'm going to go out, see what I can find. Took his rifle, started to walk out, and the family stopped him and said, hey, please, let somebody else go with you. Don't go out alone. Please don't do this. Many people tried to discourage him, and he said, no, it's my last time to go before we have to leave, so I want to go. He was described in good health, super competent outdoorsman. He had lived at a place called Eaton Ranch. He was really comfortable in the outdoors. He left. He's supposed to be back about 4 o'clock. He didn't return. Well, they thought he'd come back later that night, and he didn't. So his daughter was married to a man named Bert Steer, son-in-law, and he was a railroad engineer for the B&M Railroad. It's kind of a big deal in Sheridan, and he organized a major search. Locals, sheriff, etc. Well, Richard disappeared on October 9th. The next day, when searchers are getting together, 2 feet of snow fell in that Bighorn Mountain area near Mail Creek. But the group of searchers still went out from Sheridan. And surprisingly, they committed 5 days to looking for Richard. He was hunting that western slope of the Bighorn Mountains, the same area that Dillon McKinnon was in. Well, nothing happened on this for years. And then a rumor came in one hunting season that 2 people had found a skeleton in this area, general area where Richard disappeared. And they said that there wasn't much clothing, they didn't find a rifle, but it was in the area where Richard disappeared, so they thought it was Richard. There was no confirmation, there was no ID on the body, there was no rifle found. There were multiple people missing in the area, but they just thought it was Richard. Never confirmed. They didn't have DNA to test back then. They didn't have anything on the body to tie it to Richard, but some of the articles still said that they thought it was, for what it's worth. Technically, he's still a missing person. But why is this all important? Because, friends, people should be found on searches and rescues, especially when canines are brought in. Canines don't care about politics. Canines don't care about anything other than the hunt. They are super excited to get out there and hunt. In 1982, canine training was very advanced. And when they brought canines in to find Nicholas Dailey, I can guarantee to you that those dogs wanted to find him more than anything. A lot of people don't understand dogs, but the biggest treat to a dog after they find somebody is you usually have a rubber bone or you have a ball and you play ball with the dog for 3 or 4 minutes and that dog will go crazy. And that's just what they want as a reward. Nothing else. The satisfaction of working and knowing their success. Dog comes to work every day. Every day. So them not finding Richard or Nicholas in such close proximity to where he disappeared, I'm sorry. I don't believe it. He was inside the basic confines of the campground and they didn't find him? Come on. And then Dillon McKinnon. Come on. This makes sense. Richard Standen, 75 years old. Doesn't make sense. And then, If you haven't watched the movie, again, this may not make any sense to you. Wyoming is a much stranger place than most people understand. And I think I brought it to you in this movie. So, if you're a Wyoming resident, I want to hear from you. I want to hear what's going on out there as strangeness, because I know there is. If you've traveled through Wyoming and you've seen something or experienced something odd, I want to hear from you. There's a lot of weird stuff going on there. In the meantime, thank you for your letters, emails. I told you I read them all. I may not respond to some. If you don't ask a question, I definitely won't respond. But thank you. Personally, thank you. I read them all. Very engaging. It's almost overwhelming at this point how many I get. But if they're to the point, if they're well written, if you use good grammar, I appreciate that. In the meantime, be nice to your neighbor. Be nice to people when you go and meet them in the public. Be one of those beacons of light. We need more of this. It will be appreciated. And you know what? Everybody who visits the village gets treated with dignity and respect. And if somebody doesn't, that person who's doing the negativity will be gone. As you guys know, we don't put up with it. So, thank you. I would have had Huck here today, but she's outside playing with Angie's. I couldn't pull her in for it. In the meantime, take care, be safe. Paulides out.